The blizzard came without mercy that February morning, sweeping across the Montana grasslands like the hand of God himself. And in its frozen grip, Jacob Mercer found something he never expected to see. A woman, barely breathing, her dark skin frost-kissed and trembling against the white death surrounding her. Jacob had ridden out before dawn, searching for 3 missing cattle from his small herd, but the storm hit faster than any man could predict. He was about to turn back toward his ranch when he saw her, a dark shape against the snow, curled beneath a skeletal cottonwood tree, her body already half buried by the drifting powder. For a moment, he hesitated, not from cruelty, but from the weight of what helping her might mean. Jacob Mercer was a practical man, hardened by loss and the unforgiving rhythm of frontier life. His wife, Sarah, had died bringing their second son into the world just 8 months prior, and since then, Jacob had been drowning in grief, drowning in responsibility, drowning in the endless demands of 2 young boys who cried for a mother who would never return. But even a practical man cannot ride past a dying woman. He dismounted, his boots crunching through the ice-crusted snow, and knelt beside her. She was Apache. That much was clear from her clothing, what remained of it. A torn, deerskin dress, moccasins worn through at the soles, and a thin blanket that offered no protection against the cold. Her lips were blue, her breathing shallow and ragged. She should have been dead already. Jacob didn't ask questions. He didn't wonder why an Apache woman was alone in the middle of nowhere, miles from any known tribal land. He simply wrapped her in his own coat, lifted her onto his horse, and began the slow, brutal ride back to his homestead. The wind screamed around them. The snow blinded him, but Jacob kept moving, one hand gripping the reins, the other holding the woman steady against his chest. When he finally reached the ranch house, a modest cabin of rough-hewn logs and determination, his 2 sons were watching from the window. Daniel, the elder at 7 years old, pressed his face against the frosted glass. Little Samuel, barely walking at 18 months, clung to his brother's leg. They had been alone for hours, and the fear in Daniel's eyes was something Jacob hated to see. He carried the woman inside, laying her near the fire that still burned low in the hearth. Daniel stared, his mouth open. "Pa, who is she?" Jacob didn't answer immediately. He was too busy stoking the fire, adding logs, pulling blankets from the bedroom. "Someone who needs help, son. Go fetch me water from the kettle." The woman didn't wake that first day, or the second. Jacob tended to her as best he could, warming her slowly by the fire, spooning broth between her cracked lips, wrapping her frost-bitten fingers in cloth. He should have taken her to town, to the doctor, but he knew what would happen. The townspeople of Redemption Creek had no love for Indians. They would sooner leave her to die in the street than offer aid. So Jacob kept her in his home and waited. On the 3rd morning, as pale winter light filtered through the window, her eyes finally opened. They were dark and sharp, filled with instant fear. She tried to rise, to flee, but her body betrayed her. She collapsed back onto the makeshift bed, gasping, her hand reaching instinctively for a weapon that wasn't there. "Easy now," Jacob said, keeping his distance, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. You were freezing to death. I brought you here." She stared at him, uncomprehending at first, and then her gaze shifted to the cabin around her, to the children's toys scattered on the floor, to the sadness that hung in the air like smoke. She didn't speak, not that day, not the next, but she watched everything, absorbing, calculating, surviving. Jacob learned her name slowly, over the course of whispered words and broken English. Kiona. It meant brown hills in her language. She had been cast out from her people, exiled for reasons she would not share. Left to wander the winter landscape alone until the cold claimed her. She had accepted death until Jacob Mercer intervened. And now, in the warmth of his cabin, surrounded by the ghosts of his own grief, Kiona faced a new question. What came after survival? For 2 weeks, Kiona remained silent, moving through the cabin like a shadow. She was weak still, her body recovering from the near death she had endured. But even in weakness, she made herself useful. She couldn't bear to simply take charity without offering something in return. It went against everything she had been taught, everything she was. She began small, folding the blankets, sweeping the floor with a worn broom she found in the corner, stirring the pot of stew that Jacob had left simmering over the fire. Daniel watched her with wide, curious eyes, while little Samuel toddled after her, reaching for her skirt with chubby hands. Jacob noticed. How could he not? The cabin, which had been descending into chaos since Sarah's death, was slowly coming back to order. The boys were calmer. The air felt less heavy, and yet he knew this couldn't last. Kiona was healing, and when she was strong enough, she would leave. She had nowhere to go, but she would leave anyway. That was the way of proud people with no place left to belong. One evening, as the sun set in ribbons of orange and gold behind the mountains, Jacob made a decision that would change everything. He found Kiona outside, standing in the snow, staring toward the distant hills. She was wrapped in one of Sarah's old shawls. He had given it to her without thinking, and she had accepted without words. The wind pulled at her long black hair, and for a moment Jacob saw not a stranger, but a woman as lost as he was. "Kiona," he said, his voice rough from disuse and uncertainty. She turned, her expression guarded. "I need to speak with you about the future." She waited, her dark eyes unreadable. Jacob cleared his throat, feeling foolish and desperate all at once. "I know you'll be wanting to move on soon. You're stronger now, but I need to make you an offer, a proposal." Her brow furrowed slightly. She understood enough English to know that word carried weight. "My boys need a mother," Jacob continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "I need help running this ranch. Winter's only half over, and I'm barely keeping us fed and warm. I can't do it alone anymore. I won't ask you to be a wife in truth, but I'm asking you to stay. Help me raise my sons. Help me keep this place running. In return, you'll have shelter, food, protection, a place to belong." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines. Kiona's first instinct was to refuse. She had been cast out, rejected by her own people for reasons that still haunted her dreams. Why would this white man, this stranger, offer her a place in his home, in his life? What did he truly want from her? Men always wanted something. But then she thought of the alternative, the endless wandering, the slow death by cold or starvation, the loneliness that had become her constant companion. And she thought of the boys, especially little Samuel, who smiled at her with such innocent trust. When was the last time anyone had looked at her without hatred or fear? "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first word she had spoken directly to him in days. Jacob met her gaze. "Because I'm drowning," he admitted, the truth raw and painful. "Because my boys are growing up without a mother's care, and I don't know how to be both parents. Because this land is hard, and I need someone strong enough to face it with me. And because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because you deserve a second chance. We all do." Kiona studied his face, looking for deception, for hidden cruelty, but all she saw was exhaustion, grief, desperation, the same thing she saw when she looked at her own reflection in the water bucket. "Your people in town," she said carefully. "They will not accept me. I have seen how whites look at my kind." "I know," Jacob said quietly. "It won't be easy, but this is my land, my home, and I'll protect you here. I give you my word." Another long silence. Then slowly, Kiona nodded. "I will stay. For now. We will see if this arrangement can work. But I make no promises beyond the spring." Relief flooded through Jacob, though he tried not to show it. "That's all I ask. One season at a time." They shook hands, an awkward formal gesture that felt both too much and too little for what they had just agreed to. And in that moment, beneath the darkening Montana sky, two broken people formed an alliance born of necessity and the faint, fragile hope that perhaps they could rebuild something from the ruins of their shattered lives. That night, Jacob gave Kiona the small room off the kitchen that had once been Sarah's sewing space. It wasn't much, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a trunk, but it was hers. Private, safe. For the first time since her exile, Kiona closed a door and knew she wouldn't be driven away in the night. She lay on the bed, staring at the rough wooden ceiling, and allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might be like to belong again. The first weeks of their arrangement were marked by silence and careful distance. Jacob and Kiona moved around each other like strangers sharing a stagecoach, polite, cautious, neither wanting to intrude too far into the other's space. But the rhythms of ranch life demanded cooperation, and slowly, grudgingly, they began to work together. Kiona threw herself into the tasks with fierce determination. She had been raised to work, to contribute, and idleness felt like death to her. She woke before dawn, restarting the fire, preparing the morning meal. She learned to make Jacob's coffee the way he liked it, strong and bitter as regret. She mended the boys' clothing, patched the holes in their socks, taught them to wash their faces and hands before meals. Daniel was wary at first, this 7-year-old boy who remembered his mother and felt guilty for accepting comfort from someone else. But Kiona didn't try to replace what he had lost. She simply existed alongside him, patient, present, and gradually his walls began to crumble. Little Samuel had no such reservations. He followed Kiona everywhere, his chubby legs carrying him after her like a devoted shadow. He reached for her when he fell, called out to her when he woke from nightmares, and despite herself, Kiona's heart began to soften toward this child who knew nothing of prejudice or hate, who saw only a woman who held him when he cried. Jacob watched these small transformations with quiet gratitude. He saw how the boys flourished under Kiona's care, how Daniel laughed more freely, how Samuel's vocabulary grew each day. The cabin felt like a home again, not just a shelter against the cold. But it wasn't all peaceful. One bitter morning in March, Jacob asked Kiona to accompany him to town for supplies. They needed flour, salt, ammunition, things the ranch couldn't provide. Kiona's first instinct was to refuse. She knew what awaited her in Redemption Creek. But Jacob's eyes held a quiet plea. "I need your help," he said simply. "The boys can't come in this cold, and I can't leave them alone for hours." So Kiona wrapped herself in Sarah's shawl, climbed onto the wagon beside Jacob, and steeled herself for what was coming. The ride to town was beautiful, the mountains gleaming white against a blue sky so bright it hurt to look at. But Kiona couldn't enjoy it. Her stomach twisted with anxiety, her hands clenched in her lap. She had faced death without flinching, but the hatred of civilized people terrified her in ways the wilderness never had. Redemption Creek was a small town, 24 buildings clustered around a single muddy street, the general store, the saloon, the church, the blacksmith. As Jacob's wagon rolled into view, heads turned, conversations stopped, eyes narrowed. "Mercer's got himself a squaw," someone muttered, loud enough to be heard. Jacob's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze forward. He helped Kiona down from the wagon, his hand on her elbow, a gesture of protection that did not go unnoticed. They walked together into Patterson's general store, the bell above the door chiming their arrival. Inside, Mrs. Patterson stood behind the counter, her face hardening the moment she saw Kiona. "Jacob," she said coldly, ignoring Kiona entirely, "what can I do for you?" "Need supplies, Clara," Jacob said, keeping his voice even. He handed her a list. "Flour, salt, coffee, ammunition for the Winchester. Some fabric if you have any decent calico." Mrs. Patterson took the list without looking at it, her eyes fixed on Kiona with undisguised disgust. "I heard you'd taken in a visitor. Didn't realize you were keeping her." "She's helping with my boys," Jacob said, his tone hardening. "Now can you fill this order or not?" The tension in the store was thick enough to cut. Other customers had stopped their shopping to watch the confrontation. Kiona stood perfectly still, her face a mask of neutrality. But inside, old wounds were tearing open. She had endured this before. The hatred, the rejection, the sense that her very existence was an offense. Mrs. Patterson finally moved to gather the supplies, her movements sharp and angry. "People are talking, Jacob, saying you've lost your mind with grief, bringing one of them into your home with your innocent boys." "Enough." Jacob's voice cracked like a whip. "You don't know her. You don't know anything about her. She's done nothing but help me and my family, and I won't stand here and let you speak about her like she's less than human." The store went silent. Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "Your wife hasn't even been gone a year, and you're already—" "My wife is dead," Jacob said, the word hanging in the air like a gunshot. "And I'm doing what I have to do to keep my sons alive and cared for. Now pack my supplies, take my money, and keep your opinions to yourself." They left the store 10 minutes later, supplies loaded into the wagon, every eye in town watching them go. Kiona sat rigidly beside Jacob, her hands trembling slightly despite her attempts to remain composed. "I'm sorry," Jacob said quietly as they left town behind. I should have prepared you better." "I knew," Kiona replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I have always known how your people see mine. It changes nothing." But it did change something. Because in that store, Jacob Mercer had defended her, not out of obligation or politeness, but out of genuine respect. He had put his reputation on the line, had stood against his own community for her sake, and Kiona realized, with a mixture of fear and wonder, that perhaps this arrangement was becoming something more than a simple exchange of labor for shelter. That night, after the boys were asleep, Jacob and Kiona sat by the fire in uncomfortable silence. Finally, Jacob spoke. "I meant what I said in town. You're part of this family now, Kiona, and I'll stand by that no matter what they say." Kiona stared into the flames, watching them dance and flicker. "In my tribe," she said slowly, "I was cast out because I spoke against a powerful man, a warrior who hurt women and was protected by the elders. I refused to stay silent, so they made me an outcast, told me I brought shame to my people." She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I thought I would die alone, forgotten, worthless." Jacob listened, his heart aching for this woman who had suffered so much. "You're not worthless," he said firmly, "and you're not forgotten, not anymore." Their eyes met across the fire, and in that moment, something shifted. Not love, not yet, but the first fragile shoots of trust, pushing up through frozen ground, reaching toward light. Spring came slowly to Montana territory, the snow melting in patches, revealing the brown grass beneath. The ranch work intensified. There were fences to mend, cattle to tend, fields to prepare for planting. Jacob worked from dawn until long after dark, his body exhausted but his spirit lighter than it had been in months. Kiona proved herself invaluable. She could ride as well as any cowhand, shoot as straight as any man Jacob had known. She taught Daniel how to track animals, how to read the sky for weather signs. She carried Samuel on her back while she worked the garden, singing to him in her native tongue, soft, haunting melodies that made Jacob stop and listen from across the yard. For the first time since Sarah's death, Jacob allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just survival. He watched Kiona laugh at something Daniel said, saw the way Samuel reached for her with complete trust. and he felt something dangerous stirring in his chest, something that felt too much like hope. But the frontier was not a place that allowed peace for long. It started with small things, cattle going missing, a broken fence that had been cut rather than damaged by weather, tracks around the property that didn't belong to any of Jacob's horses. At first, he dismissed it as bad luck, perhaps a wandering drifter passing through, but then the threats became more direct. One morning, Jacob found a dead coyote nailed to his barn door, a crude message carved into the wood beneath it. Indian lover. His blood ran cold. He tore the coyote down and burned it before Kiona or the boys could see. But the message was clear. Someone wanted him to know they were watching. Someone wanted to punish him for taking Kiona in. He said nothing to Kiona that day, but she sensed the change in him. The way his eyes scanned the horizon constantly, the way he kept his rifle closer than usual. That night, after the boys were asleep, she confronted him. "What are you not telling me?" she demanded, her dark eyes fierce. Jacob hesitated, then showed her the carved message he had kept hidden. Kiona's face went carefully blank, the same mask she wore when facing pain. "This is because of me," she said flatly. "I should leave, before they hurt you or the boys." "No," Jacob's voice was steel. "This is my land and you're under my protection. Nobody's driving you away." "Your pride will get you killed," Kiona shot back. "White men have killed for less than this. You think your principles will stop them?" "I think," Jacob said slowly, "that running from hate never stopped it from spreading. And I think you're worth fighting for." The words hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Kiona looked away, blinking rapidly. No one had ever said such a thing to her, not in her entire life. 2 weeks later, the situation escalated. Jacob had ridden out early to check the northern fence line, leaving Kiona alone with the boys. She was hanging laundry on the line outside when she heard the horses. 3 riders, approaching fast. Her hand instinctively moved to the knife she kept at her belt, the only weapon she had on her. The men reined in their horses 20 yards from the cabin. Their leader was a man named Cole Turner, a local rancher with a reputation for cruelty and a hatred of Indians that bordered on obsession. He had lost family to a raid years ago, and his heart had turned to stone. "Where's Mercer?" Turner called out, his voice dripping with contempt. "He is not here," Kiona replied, keeping her voice steady. She positioned herself between the men and the cabin, where Daniel and Samuel were inside. "You will leave his property." Turner laughed, a harsh sound. "You giving me orders, squaw, on a white man's land?" He dismounted, his 2 companions following suit. "We came to deliver a message. Tell Mercer he needs to get rid of his filth before something bad happens. To him, to his boys. Accidents happen all the time out here." Kiona's hand tightened on her knife. "Touch them and you will regret it." Turner stepped closer, his face twisted with hate. "You threatening me? You're nothing but—" The crack of a rifle shot split the air. All 4 of them froze. Jacob stood 30 yards away, his Winchester aimed directly at Turner's chest. His face was calm, but his eyes were murderous. "Get off my land." Each word was a hammer blow. Turner's hand moved toward his own gun, but Jacob fired again, this time at the ground inches from Turner's boots, sending dirt spraying. "Next one goes through your knee," Jacob said conversationally. "Then I work my way up. Now move." The 3 men scrambled for their horses, Turner's face purple with rage. "This isn't over, Mercer," he shouted as they rode off. "You're making enemies you can't afford." Jacob watched until they disappeared over the hill, then lowered his rifle. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady when he turned to Kiona. "Are you all right? The boys?" "We are unharmed," Kiona said, though her heart was racing. "But Jacob, this will not end well. They will come back." "I know," Jacob said grimly. "That's why we need to be ready." That night, after the boys were asleep, Jacob taught Kiona how to use the Winchester. They stood in the moonlight, his hands guiding hers, showing her how to sight down the barrel, how to breathe before the shot. "I won't always be here," he said quietly. "You need to be able to protect yourself and the boys." Kiona learned quickly. She had always been a fast learner, but as she held the rifle, feeling its weight, she understood what Jacob was really saying. He was trusting her, not just with chores or childcare, but with the lives of his children, with everything he held dear. "Jacob," she said softly, lowering the rifle, "why are you doing this? Really? You could send me away, make peace with these men. Why risk everything?" Jacob looked at her for a long moment, the moonlight casting shadows across his weathered face. "Because," he said finally, "somewhere along the way, you stopped being a stranger I took in from the snow. You became family, and I don't abandon family." Tears stung Kiona's eyes, though she fought them back. "I never thought I would have a family again." "Well," Jacob said with a small smile, "you do now, broken and strange as it might be." They stood there in the darkness, two people who had been thrown together by chance and circumstance, but who were choosing, deliberately and consciously, to stay together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And in that choice lay something powerful, something worth defending. The attack came on a moonless night in late April, when the world was dark as pitch and the only sound was the whisper of wind through the grass. Jacob had been expecting it, had spent weeks preparing for it. But when the moment finally arrived, his heart still clenched with fear. The first sign was the smell of smoke. Jacob jerked awake, his instincts screaming danger. He was out of bed and reaching for his rifle before his mind fully processed what was happening. Through the window he saw the barn, his barn, engulfed in flames, the fire reaching toward the night sky like hungry fingers. "Kiona!" he shouted, running from his room. She was already awake, already moving, gathering the boys from their beds. Daniel was crying, terrified by the sudden chaos. Samuel clung to Kiona's neck, his face buried against her shoulder. "They are here," Kiona said, her voice calm despite the terror in her eyes. "How many?" "Don't know," Jacob said, checking his rifle. "But we have to assume Turner brought others. Get the boys to the root cellar, now." The root cellar was beneath the kitchen floor, a small underground space that Jacob had stocked with supplies weeks ago, preparing for exactly this scenario. Kiona lifted the trap door, quickly climbing down with Samuel, while Jacob helped Daniel descend the ladder. "Mama Kiona," Samuel whimpered, the first time he had called her that. Even in the midst of terror, Kiona's heart cracked open at the word. "Shh, little one," she whispered, holding him close. "Be brave." Jacob knelt at the edge of the opening, his eyes meeting Kiona's. "Stay here. No matter what you hear, don't come out until I come for you. You understand?" "Jacob," Kiona started, but he cut her off. "Promise me," he demanded. "Promise me you'll protect them." "I promise," Kiona whispered. "But you must promise to come back." Jacob's hand reached down, brushing her cheek. "I'll come back," he said. Then he lowered the trapdoor, sealing them in darkness. Outside, the night was chaos. The barn was fully engulfed now, the heat intense enough to feel from the cabin. Jacob could see shapes moving in the firelight. 4, maybe 5 men. More than he'd hoped for. Less than he'd feared. Cole Turner's voice rang out across the yard. "Mercer, send out the squaw and we'll let you and your boys live. Keep hiding her and we'll burn you all out." Jacob positioned himself at the window, rifle ready. His hands were steady now, all fear burned away by cold fury. These men had come to his home, had threatened his children, had tried to take away the woman who had become everything. Kiona had become everything. "Only thing burning tonight is your chances of walking away alive," Jacob shouted back. He fired once, deliberately missing, showing them he was armed and ready. The response was a hail of bullets that shattered the cabin windows, sent splinters flying from the walls. Jacob ducked, then returned fire, aiming for the shapes moving in the darkness. He heard a cry of pain. He'd hit someone. Good. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Jacob moved from window to window, firing, reloading, firing again. His ammunition was running low. The cabin was filling with smoke from the burning barn. His mind raced, calculating odds, planning, surviving. Then he heard it, the sound of horses approaching fast from the west, more of Turner's men. Jacob's heart sank. He couldn't fight off 8 or 9 attackers, not alone. But the new arrivals weren't Turner's allies. "Turner!" A commanding voice boomed across the chaos. "Stand down! This is Sheriff Harrigan!" The shooting stopped. Jacob peered through the smoke, barely believing what he was seeing. The sheriff from Redemption Creek had arrived with 4 deputies, all armed, all aimed at Turner and his men. "What the hell, Harrigan?" Turner snarled. "This isn't your business." "Arson, attempted murder," Harrigan replied coldly. "That's exactly my business. Drop your weapons, now." For a tense moment, it could have gone either way. Then one by one, Turner's men laid down their guns. They were led away in chains, Turner screaming curses and threats the entire time. Sheriff Harrigan approached the cabin, his expression grave. "Mercer, you all right?" Jacob stumbled out, exhausted and shaking. How did you know?" "Mrs. Patterson," Harrigan said with a wry smile. "After you stood up to her in the store, she couldn't stop thinking about it. Started asking questions around town. Found out Turner was planning something. She rode out herself to tell me. Insisted I come check on you." He shook his head. "Never thought I'd see the day Clara Patterson defended an Indian woman, but here we are." Jacob's legs nearly gave out with relief. He managed to reach the cabin, lifting the trap door. "Kiona, boys, it's safe now. It's over." 3 faces looked up from the darkness. 2 small, tear-stained boys and 1 fierce woman who had kept them safe. Samuel reached up immediately, and Jacob lifted him out, holding his son tight. Then Daniel scrambled up, followed by Kiona. For a moment the 4 of them simply stood there, holding each other, the barn still burning behind them, but the immediate danger past. They had survived together. Sheriff Harrigan cleared his throat. "I'll need statements from both of you. But that can wait until morning. You folks should know something. After tonight, after what Turner tried to do, there's going to be talk in town. Good talk. About how you protected your family. About how that woman down there—" He nodded to Kiona. "About how she saved those boys. People are starting to see things differently." Jacob looked at Kiona, saw the disbelief in her eyes. "Things are changing?" she asked softly. "Slowly," Harrigan admitted. "But yes, not everyone in Redemption Creek is like Turner. Some of us remember what it means to be decent human beings." He tipped his hat. "Get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." As the sheriff and his men departed, leading Turner's gang away, Jacob and Kiona stood in the ruins of the barn, the boys clinging to them. "We lost the barn," Jacob said quietly. 3 horses, most of the hay stores. "But we did not lose each other," Kiona replied, her hand finding his. "That is what matters." And standing there in the wreckage, with his son safe, and the woman he had come to love beside him, Jacob Mercer understood the truth. They would rebuild, they would endure, because that's what families do. Summer came to the Montana Territory with a gentleness that felt like a gift after the violence of spring. The barn was rebuilt, not just by Jacob's hands, but by the hands of neighbors from Redemption Creek who arrived one by one offering help. Men who had once sneered now hammered nails beside him. Women who had turned away now brought food and fabric, offering quiet apologies to Kiona. Not everyone changed. Some folks still muttered, still disapproved, but enough had shifted that Kiona could walk into town beside Jacob without feeling like prey. Daniel could talk about Mama Kiona at school without other children mocking him. And Samuel, sweet Samuel, simply loved the way children do without question or condition. The ranch flourished under their combined efforts. Jacob's cattle herd grew. The garden Kiona tended produced more vegetables than they could eat, enough to sell in town. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their movements synchronized through months of shared labor and shared life. But something remained unspoken between them, a tension that had nothing to do with danger or survival, and everything to do with the careful distance they still maintained. They lived as partners, as friends, as co-parents, but not as husband and wife, not truly. Jacob felt it every time their hands brushed while working, every time he heard Kiona singing to the boys at bedtime, every time she smiled, those rare, precious smiles that transformed her entire face. He had fallen in love with her, deeply, irrevocably in love, but he didn't know if she felt the same, and he was terrified to ask, terrified to ruin the fragile peace they had built. Kiona felt it too. The way her heart raced when Jacob came in from the fields, his shirt damp with sweat, the way she found herself watching him with the boys, seeing the gentleness in his large hands, the way she caught herself imagining, wanting, things she had promised herself she would never want again. She'd been hurt too many times, rejected too often. How could she trust this feeling? One evening in late July, as the sun painted the sky in shades of amber and rose, Jacob found Kiona sitting on the porch steps, watching the boys play in the yard. He sat beside her, their shoulders almost touching, and for a long moment, neither spoke. "They're happy," Kiona said finally, her voice soft. "I never thought I would be part of making children happy." "They love you," Jacob replied. "We all—" He paused, gathering courage. "Kiona, I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, her dark eyes reflecting the sunset. "What is it?" Jacob took a deep breath. "When I brought you here, it was a practical arrangement. I needed help, you needed shelter. That's all it was supposed to be. But somewhere along the way—" He struggled for words, his hands clenching and unclenching. "You became more than help, more than just someone living in my house. You became the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before sleep. You became everything." Kiona's breath caught. "Jacob." "I love you," he said, the words rushing out now. "I love your strength. I love how you never gave up, even when the world tried to break you. I love how you sing to Samuel in your language. I love how you taught Daniel to track deer. I love how you've made this house a home again. And I know this wasn't part of our arrangement. I know I have no right to ask for more than what we agreed, but I'm asking anyway." He turned to face her fully. "Kiona, will you be my wife, not in name only, but in truth? Will you let me love you the way you deserve to be loved?" Tears streamed down Kiona's face, the first tears Jacob had ever seen her shed. She covered her mouth with her hand, overwhelmed by emotion. "You cannot love me," she whispered. I am broken, used up, cast away. How can you—" "You're not broken," Jacob said fiercely, taking her hands in his. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. And if your people were foolish enough to cast you out, then their loss is my gain, because you're here now, with me, with us, and I don't want to spend another day pretending I don't love you." Kiona looked into his eyes, searching for doubt, for pity, for anything false, but all she saw was truth, raw, honest, vulnerable truth. This man, this white rancher who had every reason to see her as less than human, loved her, truly loved her. "I am afraid," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm afraid to trust this, to trust you, to trust that this is real." "I'm afraid too," Jacob said gently. "Loving someone means risking pain. I learned that when I lost Sarah. But I also learned that love is worth the risk, that a life without it is no life at all." He squeezed her hands. "I can't promise we won't face hardship. This land is too harsh for easy promises, but I can promise I'll stand beside you, I'll defend you, I'll cherish you, for as long as I draw breath." Kiona closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. She thought of the woman she had been, exiled, hopeless, waiting to die in the snow. She thought of the woman she had become, strong, needed, loved. The transformation seemed impossible, and yet here she was. "Yes," she whispered, opening her eyes. "Yes, Jacob, I will be your wife in truth and in heart, because—" Her voice grew stronger. "Because I love you too. I have loved you since the day you stood against those townspeople for my sake, since the day you trusted me with your sons, since the day you showed me I was worth something." Jacob pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Kiona let herself be held, let herself be loved. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. Not just physically safe, but safe in her very soul. The boys, noticing their embrace, came running. "Pa, Mama Kiona, why are you crying?" Daniel asked, concerned. "Happy tears, son," Jacob said, laughing through his own tears. "Just happy tears." Samuel, not understanding but wanting to be part of whatever was happening, threw his arms around both of them. "Hug!" he declared. Daniel joined in, and the four of them sat there on the porch steps, tangled together, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice and love and shared survival. 2 weeks later, they were married in a simple ceremony at the ranch. Sheriff Harrigan officiated, and to everyone's surprise, half of Redemption Creek turned out to witness it. Mrs. Patterson brought a cake, a peace offering that Kiona accepted with grace. Even Daniel's schoolteacher came, telling Kiona quietly, "Those boys are lucky to have you." It wasn't perfect. There were still those who disapproved, who would always see Kiona as an outsider, but there were more, many more, who saw a woman who had proven her worth through courage and sacrifice, who saw a family that had survived against impossible odds, who saw love where they had expected only tragedy. As autumn painted the mountains in gold and crimson, Jacob and Kiona stood together in the rebuilt barn, looking out over their land. The boys were in the house, Daniel helping Samuel with his letters. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance. The sky was clear and endless. "Do you ever think about your tribe?" Jacob asked quietly. "About going back?" Kiona was silent for a moment. "I think of them sometimes," she admitted. "But they are my past. You, the boys, this ranch, you are my present, my future. This is where I belong now." Jacob slipped his arm around her waist. "I'm glad," he said simply, "because I can't imagine this life without you." "You almost had to," Kiona reminded him. "If you had ridden past that tree, if you had left me to die." "But I didn't," Jacob interrupted. "Maybe it was fate, maybe it was God, maybe it was just blind luck. But I found you, and you found me. Two broken people who needed each other more than we knew." Kiona leaned her head against his shoulder. "We are not so broken anymore, I think." "No," Jacob agreed, smiling. "We're not." That winter, their first as a true married couple, was the hardest Montana had seen in a decade. The snow fell for days without stopping. The temperatures dropped so low that water froze in seconds. The wind howled like a living thing, trying to tear apart everything in its path. But inside the Mercer cabin, there was warmth, there was laughter, there was the sound of Kiona's songs mixing with Jacob's deep voice reading stories to the boys. There was the smell of fresh bread and coffee. There was the feeling of safety that comes from being loved and known. On Christmas morning, Jacob gave Kiona a gift, a beautiful shawl he had commissioned from a weaver in town, dyed in deep blues and greens. "So you have one that's truly yours," he said. "Not borrowed, yours." Kiona's eyes filled with tears as she wrapped it around her shoulders. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "the most beautiful thing I have ever owned." "Not as beautiful as you," Jacob replied, and Kiona laughed, a sound that still startled Daniel and Samuel because it was so rare and so precious. She gave Jacob her own gift, a pair of gloves she had made from deer hide, decorated with intricate beadwork in patterns from her people. "So your hands stay warm," she said, "these hands that have built so much, that have protected so much." Jacob put them on, flexing his fingers, marveling at the craftsmanship. "They're perfect," he said, "just like you." "I am not perfect," Kiona protested. "You're perfect for me," Jacob clarified, "and that's all that matters." The boys gave them drawings, crude but heartfelt pictures of their family, 4 stick figures holding hands in front of a house. Daniel had written beneath it in careful letters, "My family." Samuel had simply drawn hearts, dozens of them covering the page. As they sat together that Christmas day, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside, Jacob looked around at his family and felt a peace he had never expected to feel again. Sarah would always be in his heart, the mother of his children, his first love. But Kiona was his second chance, his proof that life goes on, that love can bloom even in the harshest soil. And Kiona, looking at the faces around her, understood something profound. She had been cast out by her people for speaking truth, had been made an outcast for refusing to stay silent in the face of injustice. At the time, it had felt like the end of everything, but it had been the beginning of a journey that led her through death's door and out the other side, the beginning of a new life, a new family, a new purpose. She had lost one people, but gained another. And this family had chosen her, had fought for her, had loved her. As spring returned once more to Montana territory, bringing with it new life and new growth, the Mercer family prepared for another season. There would be challenges ahead. There always were on the frontier. There would be losses and heartaches and moments of doubt. But they would face them together, Jacob with his quiet strength and unwavering loyalty, Kiona with her fierce determination and hard-won wisdom, Daniel with his growing courage and kind heart, and Samuel with his innocent love and boundless joy. One morning, as they worked together in the garden, Samuel planting seeds with chubby hands while Daniel carefully measured rows, Jacob turned to Kiona and said, "Do you remember what you told me that first night? That you'd stay until spring, see if it worked?" Kiona smiled, her face turned toward the sun. "I remember." "Well," Jacob said, grinning, "it's spring again. You planning on going anywhere?" Kiona looked at him, at the boys, at the land stretching out before them, their land, their home. She thought of the woman she had been, half frozen in the snow, ready to give up. She thought of the woman she had become, standing here in the sunshine, surrounded by love and purpose and hope. "No," she said firmly, "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home now. You are my home." Jacob kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Then we're right where we're supposed to be." And in that moment, with the sun warm on their faces and their children laughing nearby and the whole summer stretching out before them, they understood a fundamental truth about survival, about love, about life itself. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you, the exile, the rejection, the loss, the grief, sometimes that becomes the door through which you walk into your real life, your true life, the life you were always meant to live. Jacob Mercer needed a mother for his sons and found a partner for his soul. Kiona needed shelter from the storm and found a home in the most unexpected place. Two broken people thrown together by chance and necessity who chose each other every single day, through the hardships and the triumphs, through the winters and the springs, and in choosing each other, they became whole. The Montana Territory was harsh and unforgiving, brutal and beautiful in equal measure. It broke weak things and forged strong things in the crucible of survival. But for those with courage, for those with heart, for those willing to see past the surface to the truth beneath, it offered something more precious than gold, more enduring than stone. It offered redemption, second chances, new beginnings. And in the end, isn't that what we're all searching for? The chance to start again, to become who we were always meant to be, to find the place and the people where we truly belong. The Mercer family found that. Against all odds, against all expectations, they found it. And they held on tight, and they never let go. And so, on the wide Montana plains, two broken souls found what they never thought they'd see again, a reason to keep going. Jacob Mercer found love where he least expected it. And Kiona, she found a home in the heart of the man who saved her. Their story reminds us that even in the coldest storms, something beautiful can still take root, if we have the courage to reach for it. If this story touched your heart, give it a like and comment below where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this frontier tale has traveled, and if you want more stories like this, of courage, love, and redemption in the Old West, make sure to subscribe and check out the other tales waiting for you here on the channel. Until next time, partner, ride safe and keep your heart open to the frontier winds.